The snow fell soft and silent over the town of Silver Creek, Wyoming, in the winter of 1889. It was the kind of snow that muffled sound and softened edges, that made the world feel both smaller and more magical at the same time. The storefronts along Main Street glowed with lamplight, their windows decorated with pine garlands and red ribbon. Children pressed their noses against the glass of the general store, eyeing the peppermint sticks and painted tin soldiers. The air smelled of wood smoke and roasting chestnuts, of cinnamon and possibility. It was 3 days before Christmas, and the entire town had gathered in the assembly hall above the Mercantile for the annual charity auction. The room buzzed with conversation and laughter, with the rustle of Sunday best dresses and the stomp of boots shaking off snow. Long tables lined the walls, each one laden with wicker baskets covered in checkered cloths, tied with ribbons, decorated with sprigs of holly and pine. Every unmarried woman and widow in the county had prepared a basket filled with her finest cooking, and the men would bid on them, the money going to help families who'd lost their crops to the early frost. Whoever won a basket got to share the meal with the woman who'd made it, and more than one courtship had begun at the Christmas auction. The tradition was as old as the town itself, and it carried with it all the weight of expectation and judgment that small-town traditions do. Martha Hayes stood at the back of the room, her hands folded over her stomach, her shoulders rounded inward as if she could make herself smaller, less visible. She was 42 years old, a widow of 3 years, and she carried her grief like extra weight, piled on top of the weight her body already bore. She'd always been a large woman, even as a girl, big-boned and sturdy, her mother used to say. But after Henry died, after the long months of watching him waste away from the fever, after the silent house and the empty bed, and the endless, echoing loneliness, she'd found comfort in the only place she could. In the warmth of her kitchen. In the ritual of kneading bread. In the sweet, forgiving softness of butter and sugar and flour. Now she was what the town called her, though never quite to her face. Fat. The obese widow. The woman who'd let herself go. The woman who should know better, who should have more pride, who should try harder. She knew what they said. She'd heard the whispers in the Mercantile, seen the sideways glances at church. She'd watched younger women pull their children closer when she walked by, as if grief and sorrow and the visible evidence of pain were somehow contagious. She'd felt the weight of their judgment almost as heavily as she felt the weight of her own body, and sometimes, late at night, she couldn't tell which was worse. But this was the Christmas auction. This was tradition. And Martha had spent 2 full days preparing her basket with the same care she'd once used to prepare meals for Henry, when he could still eat, when there was still hope. She'd baked her famous apple pan dowdy, the one that had won the blue ribbon at the county fair 5 years running. She'd made buttermilk biscuits so light they practically floated. She'd fried chicken to golden perfection and packed it with her bread and butter pickles, the sweet tart ones that folks used to beg the recipe for. She'd wrapped everything carefully in wax paper and linen napkins, arranged it all in the basket with sprigs of rosemary and a small bouquet of dried wildflowers she'd saved from summer. She'd tied the whole thing with a length of blue satin ribbon she'd been saving, the color of a clear winter sky. It was beautiful. She knew it was beautiful. She'd poured all her loneliness and all her hope into that basket, all the love that had nowhere else to go. But as she stood there watching the auction begin, as she heard the auctioneer's voice ring out cheerful and loud, as she saw the men surge forward, laughing and competitive, bidding up the prices on baskets made by the pretty young things and the respectable widows who still had their figures, she felt that hope begin to curdle into something cold and sick in her stomach. The auctioneer was a florid man named Tucker who ran the feed store and loved the sound of his own voice. He held up the first basket, a frothy thing decorated with lace, and the bidding started at $2. Within seconds, it had climbed to $7. The young woman who'd made it, Sarah Miller, stood near the front, blushing prettily, her hand at her throat. The banker's son won the bid at $8.50, and the room erupted in applause and good-natured catcalls. It went like that, basket after basket. The pretty ones, the young ones, the respectable ones. Their baskets went for $5, $8, $10. The room was warm with bodies and laughter and the pleasant cruelty of social hierarchy on display. Martha's basket sat near the end of the table. She'd placed it there herself, hoping it might be overlooked in the excitement,
hoping she might somehow slip through unnoticed. But Mr. Tucker was thorough. He worked his way down the table, his voice growing hoarser, his face growing redder, and finally, inevitably, he reached for her basket. He lifted it high, and the blue ribbon caught the lamplight. "Now here's a fine-looking basket," he said, his voice booming. For just a moment, Martha felt a flicker of pride. The basket was beautiful. Anyone could see that. "Who's the lady made this one?" Tucker asked, scanning the room. Martha raised her hand, just slightly, just enough. She felt every eye in the room turn toward her. The warmth drained from her face. "Ah, Mrs. Hayes," Tucker said, and something in his voice changed. "Not unkind, exactly, but careful. Too careful. Well, let's start the bidding. Shall we say $2 to start?" Silence. The room had gone utterly quiet. No hands went up. Men who'd been shouting bids moments before suddenly found their boots fascinating. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Tucker cleared his throat. "Come now, gentlemen. Look at this fine basket. I'm sure what's inside is just as pretty as the outside. Shall we say $1.50? More silence. Martha felt heat crawl up her neck, into her cheeks. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to melt into the floorboards. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. $1? Tucker's voice had lost its bluster. He sounded embarrassed now, embarrassed for her, which was somehow worse. "Just $1 for charity, gentlemen." A snicker rippled through the crowd. Someone said something Martha couldn't quite hear, and someone else laughed. The sound cut through her like a blade. Tucker set the basket down. He was about to move on. He was going to pass over her basket entirely, let it sit there unclaimed, the only basket no one wanted. The only woman no one wanted. And then a voice cut through the silence. Deep. Quiet. Absolutely certain. $30. The room went silent again, but this was a different kind of silence. This was shock. Every head swiveled toward the back corner of the room. Martha turned, too, her heart hammering against her ribs. The man who'd spoken stood near the door, half in shadow. He was tall, broad-shouldered, somewhere in his 50s, with silver threading through his dark hair. He wore a clean work shirt and a sheepskin coat, and his face was weathered in the way that spoke of years in the sun and wind. His eyes were grey, calm, unreadable. He'd been standing so still, so quiet, that Martha hadn't even noticed him. She didn't know him. Or rather, she knew of him. Everyone in Silver Creek knew of him. He was Cole Brennan, the rancher from the property 5 miles north of town. He'd moved to the area 4 years ago, bought the old Hutchins place, and turned it into one of the most prosperous cattle operations in the county. He kept to himself. He was polite when he came to town for supplies, but he didn't socialize. He didn't come to church. He didn't attend town gatherings. Until now. Tucker's mouth had fallen open. "Did you say $30? "I did," Cole said. His voice carried easily despite its quietness, the voice of a man used to being heard. "But that's 3 times what any other basket's gone for," Tucker stammered. "I know what I bid," Cole said. He stepped forward, out of the shadows, and pulled a worn leather wallet from his coat. He counted out the bills with deliberate care and laid them on the table. For Mrs. Hayes's basket. And for the charity. The room erupted. Everyone was talking at once, voices rising in shock and speculation and disbelief. Why would Cole Brennan, the wealthiest man in the county, a man who'd never shown interest in any woman since he'd arrived, pay $30 for the fat widow's basket? Martha couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. She could only stare at this stranger who'd just upended her humiliation and turned it into something else entirely, something she didn't yet understand. Tucker, recovering himself, cleared his throat loudly. Well. Sold to Mr. Brennan for $30. He banged his gavel with unnecessary force. "Most generous, sir. Most generous indeed." Cole picked up the basket. He crossed the room, and the crowd parted before him like water. He stopped in front of Martha. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the silver in his beard, the steadiness of his gaze. "Mrs. Hayes," he said quietly, "I believe the custom is that we share this meal. Would you do me the honor?" Her mouth was dry. She couldn't find words. She managed a tiny nod. "There's a table over there," he said, gesturing to the far corner, away from the crowd. "If that suits you." It did. God, it did. She wanted away from all these staring eyes, all these whispers. She followed him, feeling the weight of every gaze on her back, feeling the enormity of what had just happened settle over her shoulders. Cole set the basket on the small table and pulled out a chair for her. She sat, her hands shaking. He sat across from her and began unpacking the basket with careful attention, setting out each dish, each wrapped bundle, as if it were something precious. "You made all this?" he asked. She found her voice. It came out smaller than she'd intended. "Yes, sir." "I can tell," he said. "There's care in it. You can always tell when someone puts care into their work." He served her first, placing food on a plate and handing it to her before serving himself. It was such a simple gesture, such an old-fashioned courtesy, and it made her throat tight. They ate in silence for a while. Around them, the noise of the auction had resumed, but it felt distant, muffled. Martha couldn't taste the food, though she knew it was good. She could only watch this stranger across from her, this man who'd just paid more money than she'd see in 6 months, just to keep her from being humiliated. Finally, she had to ask. Her voice came out as a whisper. "Why?" Cole looked up from his plate. His grey eyes met hers, and there was something in them, something that looked like understanding. Like recognition. "Because your basket deserved a bid," he said simply. "And because no one should be treated the way you were being treated. You don't even know me." "No," he agreed. "But I know cruelty when I see it. And I know kindness when I taste it." He gestured to the food. This meal was made by someone who knows how to care for people. Someone who puts love into small things. That's worth more than most folks realize. Tears pricked at Martha's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of all these people. "I had a wife," Cole said quietly, and something in his voice made Martha still. "She died 6 years ago. Before we moved here. People judged her, too. For how she looked. For her size. They couldn't see past it to who she was. She was the kindest person I ever knew. Brave. Funny. She had a laugh that could light up a whole room." His voice went rough. "She died giving birth to our daughter. The baby died, too. And I've spent every day since then missing her. Missing them both." Martha's hand went to her mouth. "I'm so sorry." "So am I," Cole said. "But I learned something from loving her. I learned that the world's measures are worthless. That beauty has nothing to do with the things people think it does. And I learned that I won't stand by and watch someone be diminished because of other people's blindness." He picked up his fork again, calmly, as if he hadn't just cracked open his chest and shown her his heart. Martha ate. Really ate, this time. The food did taste good. She'd forgotten that it could, forgotten that there was pleasure in sharing a meal, in sitting across from someone who looked at you like you were a person, not a problem. They talked, a little. Small things. He asked about her cooking, and she found herself telling him about the apple pan dowdy, about the trick of adding just a touch of cider vinegar to the crust. He told her about his ranch, about the new calves due in spring, about the herd he was building. His voice was low and soothing, and she found herself relaxing, the terrible tension in her shoulders finally beginning to ease. When the meal was over, Cole packed the empty dishes back into the basket with the same care he'd shown. Unpacking them. "May I walk you home, Mrs. Hayes?" She should say no. She should protect him from the gossip this would cause. She should protect herself from the inevitable disappointment when he realized what everyone else already knew, that she wasn't worth his time, wasn't worth anyone's time. But she was so tired of being alone. And he was looking at her with those steady grey eyes, waiting, patient. "Yes," she whispered. "I'd like that." They left together, and the whispers followed them out into the snow. Over the next 2 weeks, Cole Brennan came calling. Not secretly. Not carefully. He drove his wagon right up to Martha's little house on the edge of town, tied up his horses, and knocked on her front door in broad daylight. He brought firewood and stacked it neatly on her porch. He fixed the broken step she'd been meaning to get to. He sat in her kitchen and drank coffee and talked to her about everything and nothing, about his ranch and her garden plans for spring, about books they'd read and places they'd been. The town watched. The town talked. Martha heard the whispers at the mercantile, saw the shocked faces at church. Mrs. Pritchard, the banker's wife, actually pulled her aside after Sunday service. "Martha, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "I feel I must speak plainly. Mr. Brennan is a respectable man. A wealthy man. Surely you can see that his attentions aren't appropriate. He's being kind, yes, but you mustn't mistake kindness for anything else." Martha felt the old shame try to rise up, try to choke her. But then she remembered Cole's voice. "Your basket deserved a bid." She lifted her chin. "Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Pritchard," she said quietly. "But Mr. Brennan is a grown man who can make his own decisions. As can I." She walked away, her heart pounding, and she felt something new. Something like pride. But not everyone in town was content with whispers. There were men who resented Cole's success, who resented his aloofness, who saw his attention to Martha as further proof that he thought himself above them. And there were those who simply couldn't abide the idea that someone like Martha might find happiness, might be chosen. It came to a head on a cold afternoon in early January. Martha was in the mercantile, buying flour and sugar, when she heard the voices. 3 men, ranch hands from a neighboring spread, standing near the stove, loud enough that she couldn't help but hear. "Brennan's gone soft in the head," one of them said. "That's the only explanation." "Or maybe he's just desperate," another said, and they all laughed. "Can't find a real woman, so he's settling for whatever he can get." "She must be grateful," the third one said. "Woman like that, she'd be grateful for any attention. Probably thinks she's struck gold." The words hit her like fists. Martha stood frozen, the flour sack heavy in her arms. "Bet she's already planning the wedding," the first one said. "Bet she's already picked out the dress. Though Lord knows where she'll find one big enough." They laughed again, cruel and careless, and something inside Martha cracked. Not broke. Cracked open. And what came out wasn't shame. It was anger. She turned. She walked straight toward them, her footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. The men looked up, startled. "You have something to say to me," Martha said, her voice shaking but clear. "You say it to my face. You don't hide behind your cowardice and your cruelty like children." The first man, a lanky fellow with a weak chin, flushed red. "We didn't mean nothing. Just talking." "You meant exactly what you said," Martha said. "And you said it loud enough to make sure I heard. So here I am. Say it now." They looked at each other, suddenly uncertain. The mercantile had gone silent. Everyone was watching. And then the door opened, letting in a gust of cold air. Cole Brennan stepped inside. He took in the scene immediately, his eyes moving from Martha to the 3 men, and his expression went cold and hard. "There a problem here?" he asked quietly. "No problem," the lanky one said quickly. "We were just leaving." "You were just apologizing," Cole said. "It wasn't a question." "Now see here, Brennan. Cole took one step forward. Just one. But there was something in the way he moved, in the set of his shoulders, in the absolute stillness of his face, that made all three men go quiet. "You will apologize to Mrs. Hayes," Cole said, his voice soft and more dangerous for it. "And then you will leave. And if I ever hear you speak about her, or to her, with anything less than the respect she deserves, I will make it my personal business to ensure your employer knows exactly what kind of men he's hired. Do we understand each other?" The silence stretched. Then, one by one, the three men mumbled apologies, their eyes on the floor, and filed out of the mercantile. Cole turned to Martha. "Are you all right?" She was shaking, but not from fear. From adrenaline. From the strange, fierce joy of having stood up for herself, of having been stood up for. "I am," she said, and she meant it. He smiled, just a little. "Good. Come on. I'll walk you home." They walked through the snow, the basket of groceries in Cole's arms. Neither of them spoke until they reached her porch. "You didn't have to do that," Martha said. "Yes, I did. They'll resent you for it. The whole town will." Cole set the basket down and turned to face her. "Martha, I have spent 6 years not caring what anyone thinks. I'm not about to start now. Especially not when it comes to you." Her breath caught. "Cole. I'm courting you," he said simply. "I thought that was clear, but maybe it wasn't. So I'm saying it plain. I'm courting you with the intention of asking you to marry me when the time is right, when you're ready. And I don't give a damn what anyone in this town thinks about it." "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know enough. I know you're kind. I know you're brave, even when you don't think you are. I know you make the best apple pan dowdy I've ever tasted, and that you put care into everything you do, and that you've been hurt, and that you've survived it. I know that I like the way I feel when I'm with you. Like I can breathe again. Like I'm not just going through the motions of living." He reached out and took her hand, his rough palm warm around her cold fingers. "I know that I'd like to spend whatever time I have left on this earth trying to make you happy. If you'll let me." Martha looked at this man, this unexpected, impossible gift. And she thought about the woman she'd been a month ago, standing in the back of the assembly hall, drowning in shame. She thought about the woman she was now, who'd faced down her tormentors, who'd let herself be courted, who'd let herself hope. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll let you." He smiled then, a real smile that lit up his whole face, and he kissed her hand like she was something precious. They were married in March, when the snow melted and the first wildflowers pushed up through the mud. It was a small ceremony, just the minister and 2 witnesses Cole brought from a neighboring town. Martha wore a dress of soft grey wool, simple and well-made, and Cole wore his Sunday suit, and when he said his vows, his voice was steady and sure. The town came to understand, eventually, that Cole Brennan meant what he said and did what he meant. That Martha was his wife, and he would tolerate no disrespect toward her. Some people softened. Some never did. But it mattered less and less to Martha as the months passed, as she settled into her new life at the ranch, as she learned that she could be loved, wholly and completely, exactly as she was. On their first Christmas together, Cole surprised her with a gift. A blue ribbon, the same shade as the one she'd tied on her basket. "So you remember," he said, "where we started. And so I remember that I'm the luckiest man alive." Martha held the ribbon in her hands and cried, and they were good tears, healing tears, the kind that wash everything clean. The town of Silver Creek learned something that year, though some learned it more slowly than others. They learned that worth isn't measured in pounds or prettiness. That love doesn't follow the world's rules. That sometimes, the most extraordinary things come wrapped in ordinary packages. And they learned that Martha Hayes Brennan, the obese widow whose basket got 0 bids, was exactly as valuable as she'd always been. It just took one man with clear eyes and a good heart to see it. And to pay triple.